Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the October 13th, 2014 Raymore City Council meeting. And call roll to confirm a quorum.
Councilmember Abdel-Gawad. Here. Councilmember Boehner.
Present.
Councilmember Holman.
Present.
Councilmember Hubach. Councilmember
Present.
Kellogg.
Present.
Councilmember Moorhead.
Present.
Councilmember Stevens.
Present.
Councilmember Westcoat absent. Mayor Kirkhoff.
Present. We do have a quorum. Everybody please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We have no presentations and awards tonight and no personal appearances, so we'll move on to staff report. Mr. Fearborn?
Thank you, Your Honor. I would ask Mr. Jim Carteret to make the report for community development.
Thank you. Just want to mention a couple of upcoming meetings that our boards and commissions have scheduled. Tomorrow evening, the Board of Adjustment will have a meeting here in the council chambers at 7 o'clock to hear a various application request from David Eller. He owns property at 214 North Murphy Street. He's requesting a variance that would allow an accessory building on his lot to exceed the square footage of the home. Not the entire square footage, but the main level square footage of the home. On October 20th, the Planning and Zoning Commission will have a joint meeting with the City Council at your regular scheduled workshop meeting. That is a work session that was discussed as part of the council goals to meet annually with the Planning and Zoning Commission. And we have a couple of topics on that agenda to go over. And then on October 21st, the commission will consider a request for a reclassification of zoning. It's for property at 317 and 319 West Foxwood Drive. This is property that's located directly across Madison Street from the post office. That's where we currently have two vacant office buildings. The request is to reclassify the zoning from professional office to our R3A multifamily residential district. The purpose of the request would be to allow the conversion of those two existing buildings into residential units. There would be 4 units in each building for a total of 8 units on the property. And again, that's scheduled for October 21st. And those are the scheduled meetings coming up.
Thank you. Questions to staff? Councilmember Stevens?
I heard these buildings get water in the basement. Are you aware of that?
We are aware of that. We heard some of that, and we know we've talked with the applicant if they are to do some renovation work, some things that need to be done. Yes, sir.
Other questions of staff? Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. The second standard report tonight is from Parks and Recreation. Mr. Kennedy is currently out of town at the Parks and Recreation National Conference in Charlotte, North Carolina, so he asked me to just alert the council to some upcoming events. Of course, tomorrow night is the final Tuesday for our farmers market, and he wanted to be sure, and we want to be sure, that we thank everyone for all the support they've given us to this incredible venture. It has simply exploded over the past few years. Raymore's Halloween Spectacular Harvest Night is scheduled for Friday evening, October 24th. Fun-filled evening for the entire family is what he's written here. And registration for youth basketball is now open. And that concludes the parks report. From my standpoint, we just have a few items. Update the City Council on this upcoming Monday night's work session items. As Mr. Carteret indicated, it will be a joint meeting with the P&Z. There are currently 2 items on the agenda for that people have asked to be included. That includes urban animals and accessory dwelling units, I believe. Isn't that correct, Jim? If the council has anything else they'd like added for discussion in that joint work session, just let me know and we'll include it on the agenda for the joint meeting with P&Z. In addition to that item, we will be having a roundabout feature presentation from the Roundabout Feature Committee, and we will be going over the 2014-2015 snow plan and having a discussion with the council staff has put on for If council would like to see the possibility of changing code and providing you with an ordinance for depositing snow on city streets from private drives, we would like to open a dialogue with the council about that. Then at your places at the dais, we handed out this evening this particular flyer. We have found, staff has found that the Municipal Officials Training Academy is, they offer some very valuable topics. I believe Councilmember Westcoat participated in one of these about a half a year ago with staff. It is a webinar. We show it right here in the executive conference room, up on the screen, and it's very participatory, very interactive, and there appear to be some very good topics. Mr. Willerth and Ms. Warner and myself will be in attendance. If any of you would like to attend this with us, just let me know and we'll put you down and come on in. We offer everything but popcorn. And that concludes staff reports this evening, sir.
Thank you. Councilmember Abdel-Gawad and then Westcott.
Quick question with that training, do they record those so people can watch them later?
Yes, they do.
So do you need to register to be able to watch it later?
Yes, if you'll register, then we can get you a copy of, and we can give you a copy of all the materials as well.
Okay.
Councilmember Westcott.
You know, this next one, which is entitled 50 Ways to Stay Out of Trouble, Ethics and Mandates for Public Officials. Since they do broadcast that in a webinar, is there a way for us to get a copy of that and actually make that mandatory for everybody who serves on a board within Raymore?
I'll check on that.
Other questions for staff? Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
We have no committee reports tonight, so we'll move on to the consent agenda. I'll entertain a motion to dispose of the consent agenda.
Mr. Mayor,
Oh, yes, please.
point of order, please.
Uh-huh.
I would request that item H, award of contract, the super oxygenated system for odor control at the Owen Good Lift Station be removed from the consent agenda and be considered separately.
That's unfinished business. That's not on the consent agenda, is it? It's on unfinished business. The consent agenda consists of items A, B, and C. City council minutes, acceptance of City Hall West Side remodeling, and dispose of
You're
surplus
right.
property.
I'm looking at it. I didn't have it opened up on my computer. I'm sorry. Thank you.
Okay. Well, back to the consent agenda. I'll entertain a motion to dispose of the consent agenda.
Mr. Mayor, I move that we approve the consent agenda as presented to include items A, City Council minutes from September 22nd, 2014, item B, the acceptance of City Hall West Side remodel project, and item C, disposal of surplus property.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve the consent agenda. Is there any discussion? Councilmember Westcott?
The disposal of surplus property, is that going to be listed somewhere to where people can actually go out and take a look at and bid on it? Or is that internal, or do we have an external site that does that?
No, we actually use an external auction site that people can go online, actually view the items and bid on the site itself.
Do we have a link to that site on our site?
We can see, yes, there is a link to it, and we'll provide the council with that. I'll be sure and email you all tomorrow.
Thank you.
Other discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Abstain? Okay. We have 7 in favor, none in opposition, and 1 abstention.
Mr. Mayor, I'll offer a reason for my abstention is because I showed up late for that last meeting. That's why I was requesting that item to be removed from there, is because I was here for that item. So respectfully, I ask that you grant me that.
What item?
The item H of the unfinished business, that's what I was here for during the last business meeting of the City Council. But we're asking to approve the consent agenda. Most of those items I was not here present for to partake in the dialogue.
Okay.
Thank you.
We'll move on to unfinished business. We have the second reading of Bill 2998 by title only.
The second reading of Bill 2998 by title only, an ordinance of the City of Raymore, Missouri, approving the final plat for Westbrook at Creekmore 10th plat, lots 284 through 310, and tracts double D and double E, a subdivision in sections 4 and 5, Township 46 North, Range 32 West in Raymore, Cass County, Missouri.
I'll entertain a motion to dispose of the second reading of Bill 2998.
Mr. Mayor, I move that we approve Bill 2998, Westbrook at Creekmore, 10th final plat.
Second.
We have a second, motion and a second to approve the second reading of Bill 2998. Is there any discussion? All in favor? Motion carries unanimously. We have the second reading of Bill 3008 by title only, please.
The second reading of Bill 3008 by title only, an ordinance of the City of Raymore, Missouri, authorizing the mayor to enter into an agreement with Hedinger Excavating, LLC, for the construction of the 2014 Johnston Drive Stormwater Project, City Project Number 14-200-201, in the amount of $79,100, and authorizing the city manager to approve change orders within established budget constraints.
I'll entertain a motion to dispose of the second reading of Bill 3008.
Mr. Mayor, I move that we approve Bill 3008, the 2014 Johnson Drive Stormwater Project.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve the second reading of Bill 3008. Is there any discussion? All in favor? Motion carries unanimously. We have the second reading of Bill 3009 by title only, please.
The second reading of Bill 3009 by title only, an ordinance of the City of Raymore, Missouri, amending the fiscal year 2014 operating budget.
I'll entertain a motion to dispose of the second reading of Bill 3009.
Mr. Mayor, I move that we approve Bill 3009, the budget amendment for the Johnston Drive Stormwater Project.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve the second reading of Bill 3009. Is there any discussion? All in favor? Motion carries unanimously. And may we have the second reading of Bill 3007 by title only?
The second reading of Bill 3007 by title only, an ordinance of the City of Raymore, Missouri, authorizing the mayor to enter into an agreement with Eco Oxygen Technologies, LLC, in the amount of $290,000 for the purchase of a Echo 2 Super Oxygenation System, City Project Number 14-183-301.
Thank you. I'll entertain a motion to dispose of the second reading of Bill 3007.
Mr. Mayor, I move that we approve Bill 3007, the award of contract for the Eco 2 Super Oxygenated System for odor control at the Owen Good Lift Station.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve the second reading of Bill 3007. Is there any discussion? All in favor? Motion carries unanimously. And that takes care of old business, and we'll move on to new business. Beginning with the city budget. It requires a public hearing. So may we have the reading of Bill 3012 by title only?
The first reading of Bill 3012 by title only, an ordinance approving the fiscal year 2015 budget of the City of Raymore, Missouri.
Thank you. I'll open up the public hearing by asking for a staff report.
Thank you, Your Honor. The proposed fiscal year 2015 budget was presented to the City Council in mid-August. Work sessions on the budget were held at the end of all of our work sessions, and a singular work session on Saturday, August 16th, and August 18th, September 15th, September 29th, and October 6th. The budget is now presented for its first reading. The budget before the council for approval reflects the city manager's proposed budget and CIP, with proposed changes to the operating and capital budgets indicated by council since that proposed budget was presented to you in August at various work sessions, presented in Exhibit A for council consideration. Fiscal year 2015 begins November 1st, 2014. That concludes staff report, sir.
Thank you. Questions of staff? Councilmember Westcott?
As we move forward with this, we have a list of things that we were going to add. Now, do we need to make the motions to remove anything that we don't want from that list, or do we need to make a motion to add each one of those items as a separate line item?
I believe that to keep the motion in the affirmative, if there were items that you did not want to be included from the list that has been proposed by council and is in the agenda item memo, I would make it an affirmative motion, and if there were items you did not want included, simply leave them out of the list.
Okay, so then when I do make the motion to move this forward, then I make it to add each one of those items.
That is correct.
With the motion. Okay.
Good question. Other questions of staff? Okay. I'll open the floor for public comment. Please identify yourself for the record and keep your comments to under 5 minutes. Seeing nobody coming forward, I'll close the public hearing. I'll entertain a motion to dispose of the reading of Bill 3012.
Mr. Mayor, I move that we approve Bill 3012, the adoption of the fiscal year 2015 city budget to include, I guess, do we number them? Or
To include the following amended items.
to include the following amended items. $300,000 for the general fund transfer to the restricted revenue fund for the Civic Center. $200,000 for the capital improvement fund transfer to the restricted revenue fund for the Civic Center. $150,000 for the general fund transfer to the transportation fund for the pavement management in 2015. $483,000 to the general fund transfer to the restricted revenue fund for the pavement management 2016-2019. $10,000 for the general fund expense for the Arts Commission startup fees, and $47,522 for the general fund expense for body cameras.
Second.
Okay. The motion and a second to approve the city budget consisting of the items listed. Councilmember Westcoat?
The reason why that I left the general fund expense for funding of the Oates bus, we're currently in the process of applying for a grant through MARC, to which if we're awarded that amount, then we would have double the amount in that budget. So we can always add the money back into the budget if we do not get the funding for MARC. So I thought that was the prudent way to handle that at this point.
Councilmember Kellogg?
Mr. Mayor, thank you for that reasoning, Mr. Westcoat. I would suggest, or I would ask that we leave it in there because that is money that doesn't have to go. It can go back into the general fund and taken away from that if not needed in the case that we do get the grant, but in the case that we don't, it's there. It's my understanding that the grant is on a percentage basis, so there could be some money there that we do not get from the grant. I don't know if it's a 50-50 grant or an 80-20 grant, but I believe that the grant that we're applying for from staff's comments is that it's not enough to fund the extra day of the Oates bus that was the intent of that line item there. So I would ask that we amend the motion to include that $2,800 for the general fund expense for funding the Oates bus.
There's been a motion to amend the main motion,
Second.
and it's been seconded. Is there any discussion? Councilmember Moorhead?
No, I initially was going to talk before that motion was put up, but I think this will generally apply to both. My additional opposition of this is the reason to keep it out altogether is the initial proposal of this is a private entity servicing private citizens. This is not a public venture. The use of public taxpayer funds for a private company opens us up into a very bad position. One, because we could have to have other groups come up and have equal treatment, so we're funding everybody's private activities. And again, regardless of this person being a former council member or not, their personal advertising venture should not be paid for by city money.
Councilmember Abdul, go on.
I'm in favor of this. I think that Councilmember Kellogg has great reasoning that even if we do get a MARC grant to help support some of the cost of this, it did say in the information we got about the grant that it would require some sort of matching from the city. So even if we do get that grant, we are going to have some money set aside for this. I'd like to see it get started right away. I think over a year ago we proved that there's a need for this in our community. I think that the need continues. I would also suggest that I think the city has many contracts with private companies that we work with, so I don't think that that's a good reason to not fund this program that's needed by the citizens in our community. That's all for now.
Councilmember Westcoat?
You know, one of the other reasons why I'm opposed to this actually being a line item in the budget is because, you know, during our work session, I think it was demonstrated that, and even conveyed by MARC, or by Oates, excuse me, by Oates, that it's the same 11 people who ride the bus continuously. Now, I'm not saying that there's not a need for this project, but under the way that it's currently structured, it's the same 11 people, and one of the riders who is not an affiliate of Oates, of the city, or of MARC actually does the scheduling. So before that we actually make this a line item in our budget, in which taxpayer money it will actually funnel to, we need to make sure that, number one, that there is a need, because, you know, I would actually submit that in a town of 19,000 where we have 11 people ride it, I don't know if we can necessarily call that a need, as opposed to, you know, a private outing. So before we actually commit taxpayer funds to it, you know, let's get the MARC grant. Let's actually do a pilot program. Let's actually collect data to see if number one, it is needed, or if it needs to be expanded. So I'm actually opposed to this actually being a line item in the budget at the current time.
Councilmember Stevens?
Being a private entity, that's where I think the money ought to come from. And I say that from someone who's already contributed to this, so I'm opposed to that as well.
Okay, there is a motion to amend. Oh, Councilmember Abdel-Gawad?
Just a little bit more information. While Sarah, I believe is her name, from Oates, told us that it is frequently the same people who ride the Oates bus on most of their outings. She also has told us over and over that there is a wait list for this program. So there are always, every week, people who don't get to ride the bus who would like to ride the bus. I think that in itself shows us that there's a greater need. I also think that this, along with many other things that we have in our budget, we would have a chance to work out the details of the contract with Oates before we sign the contract. Just having it in the budget doesn't say that we have to pay for this and use the same contract that everybody else uses. Oates has told us over and over again that we can decide where the bus goes. We can say that it only goes to places in Raymore. If we wanted, when we work out the contract with Oates, we could also say that we want to give priority to people who haven't been on the bus yet this month. I think that there are a lot of things that we could write into our contract with Oates to protect us from some of the things that you guys are afraid of about having this contract with them. Again, I think this is really a great need in our community. I think that we can set it up so that it will benefit the people in our community as well as the businesses in our community, and I would like to see it in the budget.
Okay, there is Councilmember Hubach.
I am always opposed to the city funds being used for private purposes. And I feel the same way with this. I know that it is very worthwhile, but we're still using taxpayers' funds for them. I would like, before we put it in the budget, I would like to see the council have a work session regarding all of the different organizations in Raymore that we think that we ought to be able to fund. Because I can think off the top of my head 2 or 3 charitable organizations that would be worthy, but we don't support them. Before we start picking and choosing which ones we want, let's have a work session and see just exactly what it is that we want to do when we start spending taxpayer money for private uses.
Councilmember Westcott.
I'd like to thank Councilmember Abdel-Gawad for bringing up the extra point that, you know, it is from what we understand, it is the same 11 people. And if there is a wait list, to me that cries foul. You know, if it's the same 11 that we constantly see, but there is a wait list, that just goes back to the point of, because somebody who is a rider there is allowed to actually dictate who gets on the bus, that's just one more reason why it shouldn't be put into a line item at this point.
Other discussion? Okay, there's a motion to amend to add the Oates funding. All in favor? 1, 2. In opposition? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Motion to amend fails. We're back to the main motion. Is there any further discussion on? Let's see. I did open a public meeting and then I closed it, right? So I'm still doing okay here. Okay. And we do have a motion and a second, right? Okay. Any other discussion? All in favor? Motion carries unanimously. And I almost messed up because I didn't put my little mark down. Move on to, let's see, Resolution 1458. The reading of Resolution 1458 by title only, please.
The reading of Resolution 14-58 by title only. A resolution of the City of Raymore, Missouri approving the 2015 through 19 Raymore Capital Improvements Program.
Thank you. And this also requires a public hearing, so I'll open up the public hearing by asking for a staff report.
Thank you, Your Honor. At the same time as the fiscal year budget is submitted to the council for approval, the 5-year capital improvement program, CIP, is also submitted. The capital program for the next fiscal year is part of the council's approval of the operating budget. The CIP for the following 4 years serves as a planning guide for the city. The proposed 2015 to 2019 CIP was presented to the City Council in mid-August and was discussed at all the subsequent work sessions or had the opportunity to discuss it at all the subsequent work sessions that were conducted for the budget itself. The CIP was also reviewed by and was the subject of a public hearing before the Planning and Zoning Commission. The CIP is now presented for approval. Changes indicated by the council during the budget work sessions process have been presented separately for consideration with the CIP. In this case, there was only one CIP expense project. There were some revenue changes, but only one expense project that is included in the CIP itself, and that is the additional funding for additional road work to be done with the street preservation project, and you see that within the agenda item memo. Again, staff would recommend an affirmative motion to include that item, especially since you've included it in the budget as well. That includes staff report, Your Honor.
Thank you. Questions of staff? Councilmember Westcoat?
So what is it that I need to add when I make this motion?
Fair question.
What should be added is move approval of the CIP with the additional amendment of the $150,000 a year in the capital budget for 2015 and $150,000 in additional in each of the subsequent 4 years.
It looks like it's $800,000 additional in each of the subsequent years.
It's actually a total of 800,000. Staff had proposed 650. Yes, and the additional revenue that is being placed into the restricted revenue fund then allows for 150 to be added to the 650 that was in the CIP for a total of 800,000. But the amendment would only be for the 150,000.
The first year.
Councilmember Moorhead?
Because I was having difficulty with following the math too. On the 2014-15 number seemed a little different. I'm looking at page 191 of the packet where you have the 5-year summary chart. Would it be more complete to merely in the motion state the annual street preservation program as provided in the memo, and then we don't have to worry about the exact dollar amounts?
You can do that
Is
as
that
well,
definitive
sir.
enough?
The reason 14-15 differs from the 800,000 is, you may remember prior to this, you all had approved an increased street preservation program to the tune of about 843, and then we added 150 to that. Now 150 is being added to that as well, which also means, just for the public's knowledge, that means that there will be over $1,100,000 in street work to be done. But the simplified form that you're presenting sounds great to staff.
Well, in that case, I'll entertain a motion to dispose of Resolution 1458 and let you folks duke it out on which is the best motion.
Mr. Mayor, I move that we approve Resolution 14-58, the approval of 2015-2019 capital improvement program to include the annual street preservation program as outlined in the memo.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to approve Resolution 1458. Is there any discussion? All in favor? Motion carries unanimously. Oh,
Your Honor.
I didn't
close the public
close the
hearing.
public hearing. Let's back up a little bit.
Thank you.
Thank you, yes. Open the floor for public comment. Seeing nobody come forward, I'll close the public comment. We'll go back to the vote. All in favor? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you. And I had it highlighted here in red, too.
My bad.
Move on to reading of Resolution 1455 by title only, please.
The reading of Resolution 14-55 by title only. A resolution of the City of Raymore, Missouri approving the extension of the preliminary plat for Madison Valley subdivision located in Section 9, Township 46 North, Range 32 West, all in Raymore, Cass County, Missouri.
Thank you. Staff report, please.
Thank you, Your Honor. I'll call on Mr. Carteret.
Thank you. Resolution 14-55 proposes a one-year extension to the expiration date for the preliminary plat for the Madison Valley subdivision. The Madison Valley preliminary plat overall for the subdivision was for a total of 202 lots. Only the first phase of this subdivision has been approved and constructed. The first phase contains 75 lots, and only 12 of those 75 lots have been developed to date. The preliminary plat was approved back in 2004, and then the first final plat in 2005. There's been extensions to the expiration of the preliminary plat approved in 2007, 2009, 2011, and 2013. A year ago, when there was a request for an extension, a one-year extension to the preliminary plat, staff recommendation at that time was to grant approval for only a one-year extension. Again, that was a time where we were still in discussions on the stream buffer amendments. And staff also recommended that there be notice, though, to the property owner that there be no additional extensions granted. We wanted to be fair to everybody that had a valid preliminary plat, and we're on a program of granting a one-year extension only at that time. Council did approve the one-year extension, but you did not authorize staff on this subdivision to send notice to the property owner about there being no further extensions. For the 2014 request that's before you, it's staff's recommendation and belief that with the adoption of the stream buffer requirements, with the fact that there's still 55 lots in the first phase of this subdivision to be constructed upon, so there's many years of development that could occur in the first phase of the subdivision before the need for additional land to be added to this subdivision. And then with the preliminary plat being extended already for 4 times over a period of 7 years, on this request, it's staff's recommendation that the request for the one-year extension be denied.
Your Honor, Joe, can you explain their options to them relative to the possibility that we have brought this resolution before you as an affirmative resolution, and that's always kind of a little bit quirky. So Mr. Willers would like the opportunity to explain your options to you.
I believe the council has a couple of options here. You can proceed with the resolution in the normal affirmative format and move to approve it, but if you're going to follow staff's recommendation, you would vote down that resolution. In the alternative, it would appear to me the council would have the right to take no action on this resolution, and the plat will just expire of its own terms because you did not take the affirmative step needed to grant an extension of this plat.
Questions of staff? Councilmember Moorhead?
Just for clarification's sake, because I could swear, and I was reading in the report here, we discussed this last October, and there was, it was a specific instruction that we intended to not renew after this point. Am I remembering this correctly? We granted a one-year exception, but it was to, in essence, put the developer on notice to kind of move forward that we were not intending to do any additional extensions. Am I correct?
Both this request and the Madison Creek subdivision later on your agenda were heard a year ago. On this specific request, the action, and I reviewed the minutes before this evening's meeting just to have it clear in my mind because these were handled a little bit differently, each of these requests. On this particular request, the motion was to grant the one-year extension, but you directed staff to not send any notification to the property owner that there would be no further extensions. So you wanted that specifically left out of this request. So you did not want this to be one and done. You left it open that you may consider another extension in 2014.
Councilmember Westcott?
My intention with this is to not move it forward, honoring the staff's recommendation. You know, I also, you know, given that this one actually does violate now our stream buffer, is that correct? Or is not in compliance with it?
How I would state that is the fact that our stream order map identifies the possibility that a stream crosses through the undeveloped land area. So there may be a stream that would trigger requirements for a stream buffer. And if that's the case, then the preliminary plat would need to be amended.
Thank you.
Quite a bit.
Councilmember Kellogg?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Curious from staff, what would happen if this here even failed to even garner a motion brought to the floor in a second?
Fails for a
That's
lack of a motion.
actually one of the council's options, then the plat expires.
Okay.
Other questions of staff? Councilmember Hubach?
I'm trying to get around this. They have not been able to sell any lots, so they've asked for an extension, and we're saying no because of the stream buffer, no. So what we're asking then is for them to come back with a new and improved preliminary plat. Is that what's behind all of this? Because one of the things that's concerning me is when I drive around through the city, I see a lot of building going on south of 58 Highway, but I see very little going on north, except maybe in Creekmore. And is there a reason for it? Are we making it more difficult for the developers in north of 58? Or are there some stream buffer problems that simply require us to make them start all over? Can you give us a little, for the people that are listening in, they don't understand why we would be approving some one-year extensions on some developers and not approving it for all developers. And I think we need some clarification on this.
Part of the, again, with the staff's recommendation on this particular request, if we go back, staff consistently supported requests for extensions over the years for all the subdivisions. It was a rare subdivision when we did not support an extension for a request. This particular one, again, and part of that was we were in the midst of our discussions on stream buffer. With the adoption of those amendments, this is one of the subdivisions that has a valid preliminary plat. And if you extend the preliminary plat, this land area remains exempt from not only that requirement, but some other requirements of our code. I think part of the reasoning staff at this point in time on this request is not supporting the extension. As again, as I pointed out, this particular subdivision does have a number of lots available, an excessive number of lots. If you, based upon the speed at which this subdivision is building, a one-year extension will be back in 1 year. You can give them a 3-year extension, likely to be back, because there's so many lots available in the first phase, very unlikely that they would be able to develop an additional phase in the rear of this subdivision. With the number of extensions we've had, there's been no activity on this particular property. And staff just feels that with the changes in the ordinances, since this preliminary plat was adopted, that it's time that they move forward with a new preliminary plat. If this preliminary plat does not receive an extension this evening, the plat has expired. We've already gone past the actual expiration date of the plat. So if the request this evening is denied, the plat is expired, and the property owner would have to come back with a new preliminary plat that met all of our current code requirements, including stream buffer.
Further questions of
And that's the
staff?
policy we're recommending to you with respect to these plant extensions. We're not picking on this particular developer, Ms. Hubach. That will also be staff's position on the next one, that we need to have them come forward with new plats in compliance with the new stream setback ordinance.
Further questions of staff? Councilmember Moorhead?
Mr. Carteret, again, recalling back when we discussed this a year ago, I know I vocalized one of my concerns was granting some extensions because we were influx with some of our code, and we wanted people to be able to participate and kind of adjust as we were adjusting. We've now made the change. I'm not really that tightly familiar with Farmers Bank and Trust. During this process, while other developers were communicating quite frequently regarding this. How much communication did you receive from them for them to understand and see the adjustment? And have they communicated any difficulties or even discussed that with you?
There has been no discussion with this particular landowner. They were certainly advised and have been advised since UDC adoption and through our whole street buffer discussion. They were sent draft copies. They were sent notices of all of our meetings, provided the opportunity to provide input at all the different levels that we had discussions at. Have heard nothing on this particular property. They received the property under foreclosure, so the developer who did the first phase up front is no longer involved. So it's a bank that does own this land area. Have had no discussions with them, other than, again, through this renewal request, I provided courtesy notice that the preliminary plat's about to expire. They submit their request. I made it very clear to this applicant, and I make it very clear to all applicants that they need to be here so they can express and respond to your question.
Councilmember Westcott?
And to just further clarify my thinking, if we grant the extension, that provides the exemption. And wasn't the exemptions to the stream ordinances and things of that nature that caused the displeasure with DNR and EPA?
It was one of the items that they identified was the number or the amount of land area that was exempt. Yes.
Other questions of staff? I'll entertain a motion to dispose of Resolution 1455. Hearing no motion, the Resolution 1455 fails for lack of a motion. Move on to Bill 3006, which will be read in an emergency reading. We have the first reading of Bill 3006 by title only.
The first reading of Bill 3006 by title only, an ordinance of the City of Raymore, Missouri, approving the master development agreement for the Good Ranch, a subdivision in parts of Section 19, 20, 28, 29, 30, and 32, all in Township 46 North, Range 32 West in Raymore, Cass County, Missouri, and authorizing the mayor to declare this as an emergency.
Thank you. Staff report, please.
Thank you, sir. I'll call on Mr. Catteret.
Thank you. Bill 3006 does propose approval of the Good Ranch Master Development Agreement. David Otis and Gib Good, who represent Good Otis LC, and Dave Otis, who represents Double G Properties, are the developers of the Good Ranch subdivision. A master development agreement has been prepared to set forth the actions the developer is to take regarding future development of the subdivision, including provisions for post-development water quality mitigation and best management practices. At your September 22nd meeting, council did defer action on this proposed development agreement in order to ensure that there be no ambiguity in the language that was contained within the agreement. I'll put page 208 of the e-packet. There were a couple of minor amendments that staff did propose to a paragraph of the agreement, again, based upon discussion we had at that September 22nd council meeting.
Thank you. Questions of staff? Thank you. I'll entertain a motion to dispose of the first reading of Bill 3006.
Mr. Mayor, I move that we approve Bill 3006, the master development agreement with the Good Ranch.
Second.
I have a motion and a second to approve the first reading of Bill 3006. Is there any discussion? Councilmember Holman.
I'm curious, I probably missed it. What's our reasoning for emergency reading of this ordinance?
Councilmember Moorhead, please.
I had actually made a request of the mayor to do an emergency read. The primary reason for this is the errors contain, or not errors, but just the language that I had reviewed prior to the meeting. Basically, it's my personal apology that I did not get to with Joe ahead of the meeting, so it kind of got brought up in the middle of it. They were changes that I thought were important, and I appreciate that staff council was in agreement with that and that. But at the same time, we had been discussing this ad nauseum. This master development agreement's been a topic of discussion for months, and just felt that the changes themselves were, while important, were small enough that to require the applicant to keep coming back and coming back and coming back, I felt was slightly discourteous for what our ultimate objective was. And so I requested that we do this today. I don't think there's any harm to the city or the applicant to do the additional read. So
I just need to be educated. Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
Councilmember Abdel-Gawad?
Is the applicant here?
That's kind of interesting. I had actually had a conversation with Mr. Otis, and I was kind of under the impression that he did intend to be here for this. All I can think is the weather may play a factor, but he had discussed the fact that because there were a couple of other items that we were going to talk about.
Mr. Otis comes out of Chicago, so the weather Mr. Fearmore is talking about is the tornadoes and difficult weather that went across there. Not the delightful rain that we've had today here in Raymore, but actually the storm system further east.
Councilmember Westcott?
And after spending over 10 hours in the Dallas airport a few weeks ago, I would definitely understand why he is not present.
Other discussion? We have a motion and a second to approve the first reading of Bill 3006. All in favor? Motion carries unanimously. We'll move on to the second reading, an emergency reading, Bill 3006, in its entirety.
The second reading of Bill 3...
We have, excuse me, a point of order.
Sure,
Don't
please.
we have to have an approval to, whenever it is a second reading, an emergency reading like that? Doesn't the council have to agree to it by a 3/4 majority? And then we can go ahead and do, because
I will ask for a review. I don't remember doing that before.
Because normally, the mayor is the one that says why we have to have it as a,
And, yes, and I
and
approve.
then we have to, and I thought we had to vote on it and had to have a 3/4 majority, because normally am I wrong on this?
I don't know, they're looking.
I've got the charter. Let's see.
If I may, Your Honor.
Please.
Reading of ordinances, Part B, page 5 of the rules, and Raymore City Council Rules of Procedure. An ordinance declared by the mayor or any council member to be an emergency shall be read by title only at its first reading. If the measure receives the affirmative vote of 3/4 of the entire council, it shall proceed to a second reading where it shall be read in full. If it fails to receive the affirmative vote of 3/4 of the entire council on its first reading, the measure shall cease to be before the meeting as an emergency measure,
Well,
and so on. It is silent to the need to vote to have it be
To have an emergency reading.
reading.
And seeing that we had a unanimous first reading, Councilmember Moorhead?
would it be appropriate then for me to move forward for an emergency read of Bill 3006?
Well, since I asked for it to be placed
Okay,
on there
okay.
as an emergency reading in recognition of your request, but it was, I'm the one that asked for it, so. So maybe we have the second reading of Bill 3006 in its entirety.
The second reading of Bill 3006 in its entirety, an ordinance of the City of Raymore, Missouri approving the Master Development Agreement for the Good Ranch, a subdivision in parts of Section 19, 20, 28, 29, 30, and 32, all in Township 46 North, Range 32 West in Raymore, Cass County, Missouri, and authorizing the mayor to declare this as an emergency. Whereas the Good Ranch subdivision is a master plan community containing approximately 1,724 acres, and whereas a memorandum of understanding documenting the understanding between the developers and the city regarding annexation, zoning, development, and the use of the property was approved by Resolution 94-8 on March 14, 1994. And whereas a development plan was approved in conjunction with the memorandum of understanding identifying the use, location, and density of various land uses within the subdivision, and whereas the First Amendment to the Memorandum of Understanding was approved by Resolution 10-97 on December 27, 2010, modifying the approved development plan, and whereas Section 455.040A of the Unified Development Code indicates that land covered by a development agreement containing provisions for post-development water quality mitigation and best management practices is exempt from the provisions of Section 455.040 regarding stream buffers, and whereas the developers of the Good Ranch have submitted a development agreement to the city that contains provisions for post-development water quality mitigation and best management practices for the land area contained in the Good Ranch subdivision. And whereas city staff reviewed the submitted development agreement and finds that it meets the requirements of section 455.040A and recommends approval of the development agreement. And whereas the City Council acknowledges that the actions contained in the development agreement submitted by the developers would provide for post-development water quality mitigation and provide best management practices for storm water quality. Now therefore be it ordained by the Council of the City of Raymore, Missouri as follows. Section 1, the Master Development Agreement for the Good Ranch subdivision attached as Exhibit 1 is hereby approved, and the mayor is authorized and directed to execute said agreement on behalf of the City of Raymore, Missouri. Section 2, emergency reading. Due to the deferral of action on this ordinance at the September 22nd, 2014 council meeting, and the applicant's need to finalize the agreement, the mayor hereby authorizes the passage of this ordinance as an emergency bill. Section 3, effective date. The effective date of approval of this ordinance shall be coincidental with the mayor's signature and attestation by the city clerk. Section 4, severability. If any section, subsection, sentence, clause, phrase, or portion of this ordinance is for any reason held invalid or unconstitutional by any court of competent jurisdiction, such portion shall be deemed a separate, distinct, and independent provision, and such holding shall not affect the validity of the remaining portions thereof. Duly read this first time the 13th day of October 2014. Be it remembered that the above ordinance was approved and adopted the 13th day of October 2014 by the following vote.
Thank you. And since this is an emergency reading, I'll open a public hearing. Asking anybody from the public to come forward. Identify yourself for the record and keep your comments to under 5 minutes. See nobody come forward, I'll close the public hearing and entertain a motion to dispose of the second reading of Bill 3006.
Mr. Mayor, I move that we approve Bill 3006, the Master Development Agreement with the Good Ranch.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve the second reading of Bill 3006. Is there any discussion? Councilmember Hubach?
If I understood correctly from Mr. Moorhead, there's a lot of little items and you're trying to bring them so they don't have to keep coming back to us and coming back to us. Is that what you're telling me? Because what I am hearing is we are trivializing the word emergency. Emergency is supposed to be a true emergency, and I haven't heard anything that says that this is a true emergency. That's what I'm asking.
In response, and Councilmember Hubach, I appreciate from one person to the next that appreciates making sure that language is proper in agreement, and I know you like to do that too. I was expressing more of an apology. I felt it was my error, not the council's, but catching an issue and presenting it to staff's council or our council was not timely, and this would force both a financial as well as a non-financial detriment to the applicant. In light of the issue, it is not a trivial catch. The language was very important in its application. I just wanted to make sure that it was brought to that attention. But it is only a few words, but I just felt from an emergency standpoint, yes, we could have waited for 2 more weeks, but how much additional time and cost would that have placed on the applicant when, again, I feel the error was my own, so that was the purpose of the request.
Other comments?
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
Lots of times we call it an emergency when a developer comes before me because they hadn't planned properly, and so they want to run something through it. And an emergency is if we have a gas explosion and we have to do something. An emergency is if a tornado goes through the town. Those are what true emergencies. But we have if it's something that we don't want to wait a second week on, well, we call it an emergency and we act on it right away. I have trouble with that. I may go ahead and vote to agree that it is a true emergency, but I would like for us in the future to make sure that these are emergencies when we call them such.
And I'll add that you can ask city staff about my reluctance to declare anything an emergency. And I take it very carefully every time that an emergency suggestion is brought forward. In this case, this is something that we've talked about for months on end. This is not something that was just sprung forward. The language in the contract, there was a council member who felt that it needed to be reviewed, which delayed the reading of the first reading for 2 weeks so that the language could be changed. If I remember right, it was 2 words that were changed in the contract. In this case, it is, in my opinion, an appropriate emergency to get this thing done. In no way are we trying to confuse the public or confuse anybody here on the dais. So, other comments? Councilmember Westcott?
You know, I'd also like to add that, you know, when Councilmember Moorhead, when he made his motion to defer, we could have gone ahead and approved it and waited for the language to amend it when it came back to us for second read. That was an option that was available to us. Now, instead, the council deferred until the next time. So this was, you know, I also see it as a courtesy to our developer when we could have taken an action that would have actually let it be, this would have been second reading tonight. They did everything that was proper. They did everything that was asked of them, and then we chose to take an action, you know, other than what we could have. So I see this as an appropriate action tonight as the emergency read to honor what the developer had originally come to us for.
Other comments? Councilmember Holman?
I can see both sides of this, but I think I would side with Councilmember Hubach on this. Generally, my interpretation of an emergency reading would be something more of a true emergency nature. I can certainly understand the point given and your choice to put this on here. It doesn't fit my general definition of emergency, but I'll vote in the affirmative because I think there's a valid reason for it.
Councilmember Kellogg?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I, sitting here going through my memory of past times where we have utilized emergency readings, and one time comes to mind where a deadline of a loan was at play. You know, so there are. I feel that the mayor has rightfully and justifiably allowed for this emergency tonight, given it due consideration and all of that. So I respect what Mr. Mayor has done and respect what Mr. Moorhead has tried to do as far as for courtesy of the developer. This isn't the first time that we've given an emergency under circumstances that didn't involve a tornado or something like that. So I agree with this, and I guess I'll use this opportunity to call the question.
We have a motion and a second to approve the second reading of Bill 3006. The question has been called. All in favor? 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3. 4? Opposition or in favor? Okay. 7 in favor, 1 in opposition. The second reading passes. And we'll move on to the reading of Resolution 1456, please.
The reading of Resolution 14-56 by title only. A resolution of the City of Raymore, Missouri approving the extension of the preliminary plat for Madison Creek subdivision located in Section 9, Township 46 North, Range 32 West, all in Raymore, Cass County, Missouri.
Staff report, please.
Thank you, sir. I'll call on Mr. Carteret.
Thank you. Resolution 14-56 is a request for a 2-year extension to the expiration date of the Madison Creek subdivision preliminary plat. This preliminary plat overall contained a total of 225 lots. 3 of the 5 phases for this subdivision have been completed, so there's 149 platted lots in all 3 phases. 30 of those lots remain undeveloped. This preliminary plat was first approved back in 2000. The most recent final plat for the 3rd phase was approved in 2004. Council has approved extensions to the expiration date of the preliminary plat in 2005, 07, 09, 2011, and 2013. Again, it was in 2013 when the request came forward. Staff recommended only a 1-year extension and recommended that the property owner be provided notice that there would be no additional extensions granted. This request, a year ago, Council approved the 1-year extension, and you also authorized staff to send notice to the property owner that no future extensions would be granted. That notice was sent to the property owner. This request this year, Again, with the recent adoption of the amendments to the stream buffer ordinance, the fact that 30 undeveloped lots remain in the currently platted subdivisions, and in this particular subdivision, we're still dealing with the original developer of the subdivision. And then the fact that the preliminary plat expiration date's been extended 5 times over a period of 8 years. So in this request, staff does recommend that the request for a 2-year extension be denied.
Thank you. Questions of staff? Thank you. I'll entertain a motion to dispose of the reading of Resolution 1456. Seeing no motion, the Resolution 1456 fails for lack of a motion. And let's move on to the first reading of Bill 3013 by title only, please.
The first reading of Bill 3013 by title only, an ordinance of the City of Raymore, Missouri, amending the fiscal year 2014 budget.
Staff report, please.
Thank you, sir. I'll call on Ms. Watson.
Thank you, sir. Mayor and council. The original budget for the Civic Center feasibility study was for $70,000 and was budgeted out of the park sales tax fund. The first 2 tasks approved by the council called for the citizen survey and the market analysis to be done. The total for these 2 tasks to be completed was $28,750. What is before you now is to move the remaining budget of $41,250 from this project out of the park sales tax fund to the restricted revenue fund, having an expense from the funds that have been set aside for the Civic Center project itself. Bill number 3013 is presented to council for their consideration.
Thank you. Questions of staff? Thank you. I'll entertain the motion to dispose of the first reading of Bill 3013.
Mr. Mayor, I move that we approve Bill 3013, the budget amendment for the Civic Center study.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve the first reading of Bill 3013. Is there any discussion? Councilmember Westcott?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I originally had asked for this because the process with the Civic Center moved forward, after the initial phase, it was clear that we weren't sure exactly which direction that this project was taking, and I thought it was more appropriate for the money to be taken out of the budget that we have already set aside for the Civic Center and return the unused portion back to the park.
Any other discussion? There's a motion and a second to approve the first reading of Bill 3013. All in favor? Motion carries unanimously. And we'll move on to the first reading of Bill 2993 by title only, please.
The first reading of Bill 2993 by title only, an ordinance of the City of Raymore, Missouri, amending the fiscal year 2014 capital budget.
Staff report, please.
Thank you, sir. I'll call on Ms. Watson.
Thank you, sir. Mayor and council. The Building and Equipment Replacement Fund is used to fund expenses associated with replacement and repair of cities' buildings and large equipment. During the fiscal year, the council approved several small projects that were not budgeted in the capital improvement plan. This bill is brought forward to you to make the necessary budget amendments.
Thank you. Questions of staff? Councilmember Holman?
Just to check for understanding, and it may maybe Mr. Feuerborn that needs to answer this. It's more checking my education. This does not include vehicles, is that correct? We have the VERP for that, is that correct?
That is correct. When Ms. Watson speaks of the equipment, it's the equipment that is actually in the building, HVAC units, wall panels, et cetera.
That's what I thought. I was just checking. Thank you, sir.
Other questions of staff? Thank you. I'll entertain a motion to dispose of the first reading of Bill 2993.
Mr. Mayor, I move that we approve Bill 2993, the budget amendment for the Building and Equipment Replacement Fund.
Second.
The budget amendment for the burp, right? Oh, okay. We have a motion and a second to approve the first reading of Bill 2993. Any discussion? Councilmember Kellogg?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is, I'm looking at 1, 2, 3, the fourth whereas. where it speaks to the emergency study of performed to determine the City Hall tower stability and repair solution in the amount of $6,500. This here's just for the fees that we've paid for the study of it. This doesn't have to do anything with the repairs that are going to be coming forth, right?
That's correct, sir. That's within the 2015 fiscal year budget.
Thank you.
Any other discussion? We have a motion and a second to approve the first reading of Bill 2993. All in favor? Motion carries unanimously. And may we have the first reading of Bill 3011 by title only, please?
The first reading of Bill 3011 by title only. An ordinance of the City of Raymore, Missouri approving a settlement agreement with CenturyLink and assigning a percentage of the settlement proceeds to the Missouri Municipal League.
And staff report, please.
Thank you, sir. For a number of years, municipalities in the state of Missouri have contended that CenturyLink did not pay taxes on certain gross receipts derived from the carrier access. CenturyLink has agreed to pay to all the cities in the class settlement group the back tax payment. You may remember from several years back, for those of you that were on the council, we realized certain windfall amounts, approximately $600,000 and change from AT&T, approximately $400,000 and change from Verizon for these same types of settlements. We now realize the same windfall of $862.29 from CenturyLink. Staff does recommend approval of the settlement agreement, and according to that settlement agreement and in keeping with past practice of the council, cities can assign a part of the back tax payment to the Missouri Municipal League for their ongoing efforts, both with this particular settlement and other settlements that they may reach, in the amount of 5%. That comes to $43.11 being paid to the Missouri Municipal League for this particular settlement agreement. That concludes staff reports.
Thank you. Questions to staff? Thank you. I'll entertain a motion to dispose of the first reading of Bill 3011.
Mr. Mayor, I move that we approve Bill 3011, the CenturyLink settlement.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve Bill 3011. Is there any discussion? All in favor? Motion carries unanimously. And that takes care of new business. Move on to public comments. Anybody in the public would like to come forward, make comment, identify yourself for the record. Keep your comments to under 5 minutes. Okay, seeing nobody coming forward, we'll move to mayor council communication. I got to get my list of randomly generated council members here. This evening, the first council member, mayor council communication, is council member Abdel-Gawad.
Nothing tonight, Mayor. Thank you.
But you get to go first. Councilmember Westcoat.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just two things. The first is I really want to thank staff for all their hard work. You really do a lot for council as well as for the city and its citizens. So I just wanted to thank you for your excellent service. The second thing is I actually want to ask the mayor if you could actually make a proclamation or something that, that white fluffy stuff that sometimes falls from the ground, falls from the sky to the ground, that we actually rename it to like sunshine, so that, when we talk about it, it's always, optimistic, that we're expecting a lot of sunshine, in Raymore or something along those lines, that we can talk about it up here and we don't actually curse ourselves.
So we could be discussing the potential of 6 inches of sunshine by morning.
Absolutely.
Okay. I will take that under consideration. Don't expect anything real quick, but I'll consider it.
And that's all.
Councilmember Boehner?
No comment.
You couldn't top it, could you? Councilmember Holman?
Just one thing, I see we've got students in the audience, so I always like to recognize them whenever they're here. And you got a bargain tonight. If your assignment had been 2 weeks ago, you were going to be here for another, hour and a half, I think. So they got off pretty easy tonight. But it's good to see you here. Thanks for attending.
Thank you. Councilmember Moorhead?
Councilmember Westcoat, I'm waiting and looking forward to that first phone call of a resident offering to take all of that sunshine from their driveway and dump it onto mine if their road doesn't get plowed. One apology I did not give was thank you to staff for the emergency read, literally. Although I guess, Ms. Warner, if I did make you mad, I'll know that by my cell phone being blown up with all the city complaint calls tomorrow. But thank you for that. I also want to thank the Royals. It was amazing that they clinched for the ALCS early, so we did not have a disrupted meeting last Monday. Tonight, we have rain, so we don't miss that as well.
That would be liquid sunshine, I believe.
Yes, liquid sunshine. And so I'm hoping that we get another clinch early so we don't have a game next Monday. So I'm wearing royal blue, so.
Thank you. Councilmember Stevens?
No comments tonight.
Councilmember Hubach?
About a couple of years ago, the Missouri Municipal League had an article on what were true emergencies for a city local government. And they said an emergency was something that could not wait until the second meeting could be held in 2 weeks later. Anything else in there, what could be dealt with at the normal business. And something that we have been discussing for 6 months or so cannot become an emergency that cannot wait until another time. I'm just concerned that we don't use words in their normal definition. We make them to suit our own requirements, and I don't think that's right. It confuses the people, and I know it certainly confuses me.
Thank you. And this evening, we've learned that we will discuss or describe white fluffy things as sunshine and wet things as liquid sunshine. So, Councilmember Kellogg, you're up.
I'm not going to add to that, but boy, I could.
Yes, I know. Treading a fine line there.
I'm going to behave.
Okay, your time is up then?
Why, thank you. I'd like to say happy Columbus Day to everybody. Didn't realize that it was Columbus Day until I got home and realized that. So anyway, today is Columbus Day, regardless of what the PC police want to call it. There's my 5 cents there. Also, Jim gave in his report that next Monday night we will have a work session, and part of that will be the roundabout subcommittee bringing forth the concepts that our consultant has come up with, and I've been doing some work at home on that also. So I'm very excited about that. No surprise there. Also, Monday night, last Tuesday night, I met with Jim on our regularly scheduled program there. First Mondays was Ward 1, so I was able to meet with him, and it was a very good meeting. Thank you, Jim, for setting those up. I really can't say how much that's an improvement. I really appreciate the opportunity to have one-on-one, frank discussions and very open. During those discussions, I complimented Jim and told him to go back and find the staff that mowed the front yard out here in City Hall. I don't know if anybody else noticed this, but I have noticed this. Even the plantings in that, you walk by those, there are no weeds there. You know, the plants are very well coordinated, I'm just kind of that type of a perfectionist. I see that, One thing that I asked Jim is, do we have special equipment for that? He said, just basically what you have at home. So, my shout out and my congratulations and sincere thanks to whoever mowed that yard. Using with what you got, you did a fantastic job. So, I do appreciate that. Not just that person, but all the staff members that do the best they can with what they have. That was one of the topics that Jim and I did discuss, and it's very good. Another thing that we discussed was, and this will be coming up in our next work session also, is snow removal. And it was...
excuse me, that's sunshine removal.
Sunshine removal, yeah. Okay. I stand corrected. Thank you, Mr. Westcoat. So anyway, we will have that discussion, and thanks, Mike, and everybody that provided the input back on that. So I say this, because where I work, it is driven into my head continuous improvement, and that is the tone and the conversation that Jim and I had last week, and it's obvious to me that culture, even though it may not, I don't know that it doesn't exist here. I suspect it does, but it's not talked about on a daily basis, at least to where I hear it. But from what I see and I witness, there is a culture of continuous improvement here because the folks that we have working for us care that much about what they do. And I just can't say enough for that. So anyway, I'm really pouring on the kudos for staff tonight, but that's what I feel tonight. So anyway, happy Thanksgiving. Yeah. You
Okay.
guys want to call it sunshine? I'll call it Thanksgiving.
And Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
Thank you. I recognize the students in the audience this evening. School is back in session. We can tell because we get students in our audience. So, there is a farmer's market tomorrow. I checked the weather before I arrived this evening. I'm hoping that we have no liquid sunshine out there tomorrow, and it looks like it just might pull through. So, and then the October 24th Harvest Night looks shaping up very well, so it looks like it's going to be a lot of fun. That's all I have this evening. We do have reason to go into executive session for personnel matters as authorized by 610.0213, so I'll entertain a motion.
Mr. Mayor, I move that we have moved into executive session to discuss personnel matters as authorized by 610.021 subsection 3.
Second.
A motion and a second. May I have a roll call, please?
Councilmember Abdel-Gawad,
Yes.
Councilmember Boehner,
Yes.
Councilmember Holman,
Yes.
Councilmember Hubach,
Yes.
Councilmember Kellogg,
Yes.
Councilmember Moorhead,
Yes.
Councilmember Stevens,
Yes.
Councilmember Westcoat.
Aye.
We'll retire into executive session. We'll reconvene only to adjourn the main meeting. Thank you, everyone.
I'm going to go and take